Conservative media personality Ann Coulter was disrupted while giving a speech at her alma mater, Cornell University, earlier this week. The disruptor shouted Coulter down as she delivered her talk titled Immigration, the Conspiracy to End America. Take a look.
No, don't touch me, don't touch me. Why am I under arrest? Do not touch me, get off of me. What's under what? Under what? For disorderly conduct.
You know, the fact that people need to know right on this, I know this is university policy. We'll just let you deal with it.
Don't. I am faculty. Do not touch me. I will get up. Do not touch me. Do not touch me. Get your hands off.
But you're treating them like children. Did you have to be told when you go to someone's wedding? Oh, and by the way, don't play a boombox in the middle of the wedding.
Now, Cornell professor Monica Cornejo was the protester. She was escorted out and arrested for disorderly conduct. Coulter last spoke at Cornell in 2022, during which she faced protests from numerous attendees and was forced to wrap up early. Cornell's provost, Michael Kaltikoff, announced her return to the school in March in keeping with the freedom of expression theme at the school this year. The latest invitation is part of an effort to allow diverse perspectives on campus. And I read what the Cornell Sun put out and the Cornell Review put out. And the Cornell Sun had this opinion piece of someone who disagrees with Ann Coulter, all of her views pretty much, but showed up just to hear what she had to say, to listen to, the perspective of her and hold it in tension with her own perspective to say, okay, maybe there's two perspectives that are true in the world at once, and maybe I should understand the other side if I think there are things that need to change about it. But then, of course, you had the Cornell Review say Ann Coulter came and only had this single protester show up and disrupt the speech. That's amazing. Only one came. We do have a rich history, human history in the West, of throwing rotten vegetables at someone who's on stage who we don't want to hear from or don't like. And now instead of throwing, rotten tomatoes or turnips, which I believe was the first vegetable used in 63 AD, it's a long-standing tradition. Now instead we stand up and shout and there's an interruption and then they're taken out. So I don't know how much of an impact this really had on the speech. I don't know how much of a big deal it is, but maybe we do need to listen to each other a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad to hear that the one campus newspaper you cited was from someone who was willing to go and listen to what Ann Coulter had to say. Based on reporting that I've been doing since really the start of my journalism career, which was really focused on bias on campus, there was this really illiberal trend on campus of people who were willing to consistently shout down speakers that they disagreed with. And beyond even just a minor interruption, but they would actually try to physically block speakers from getting to the podium. There was a sort of infamous incident at UC Berkeley where Ben Shapiro showed up to speak. And it's kind of funny, now we would consider Ben Shapiro to probably be more moderate than a lot of the conservative speakers who are out there now. But at the time, he was considered radical and extreme by some of the undergrads there. And they ended up setting multiple fires on campus. They tried to barricade the doors that he was supposed to go in. And this happened recently as well to Riley Gaines, who is the University of Kentucky swimmer who protested the inclusion of Leah Thomas in competition. And so to me, this is part of a larger trend, unfortunately, of some people on campus, whether it's professors or students, really being unwilling to engage with people who have opposing views from them and having this sort of fundamental conceit that because they adhere to whatever the dominant view on campus is, that they are absolutely right, that they have some kind of moral high ground, and that confers on them the authority to prevent other people from speaking. And I just hope that universities continue to take the approach that Cornell has taken, which is to try to elevate all different kinds of speech and allow people to have these important debates as opposed to really just one view really having the predominant hearing on campus.
Right. There can be maybe a short sentence you can get out when there's a speaker, at an event. Hillary Clinton spoke at Columbia University talking about sexual violence against women. A protester stood up and pointed out that she's essentially ignored the violence of the IDF against women. And the protester that stood up is someone who experienced personally sexual violence by an IDF soldier. And so, you get this sentence out and it has an impact. People hear it. Okay, we move on. But I think when we get to the point of blocking the doors to the event so that the speaker can't get in, At what point are you making this effort to not let ideas flow that's almost akin to like book banning, right? We hear about people banning or burning books, right? And we're like, this is horrible. We want people to access whatever books they want to read. But preventing people from going and listening to a speaker is preventing the free flow of ideas. So where do we draw the line? Do we say, well, we're going to ban Mein Kampf. We don't want people reading that. I think that you should instead put your efforts into being more convincing. If you really want people to be on your side politically, you don't change a lot of minds with being very loud and being very disruptive in a situation where it's a college campus and someone's giving a lecture. Like, that's not the kind of disruption that makes the political point that I think most people think it does. I think if you're going to be disruptive, maybe show up to JP Morgan Chase and get mad about, like we saw, protests that were very successful, where they showed up to the CEO of JP Morgan Chase's country club and they protested about how late fees were a way to punish the poor for being poor. They showed up and said overdraft fees were, this very unjust practice to keep people in this cycle of poverty. And that was very effective. They ended up changing that policy. But I don't think anyone's changed their minds politically because protesters showed up to a lecture to stop it from happening. And I think we should probably focus on the battle of ideas if that's what we're interested in.
I agree. I mean, to your point about the interruptions that take place and trying to get both sides heard, I know for a fact that Ann Coulter does pretty extensive Q&A sessions. So people, of course, are always welcome to come and actually have that dialogue with her. And one of the beautiful things about free speech is that we allow ideas to be heard no matter how disgusting they may be, because we believe that we do better when we have an opportunity to counter those ideas effectively, as opposed to letting them sort of proliferate underground and really create sort of a radical extremist undercurrent beneath our country's popular dialogue. That's really one of the main purposes of creating a culture of free speech. I know when I was in school at Georgetown, I was a very active member of the College Republicans, probably to no one's surprise on this program. And there were several occasions where we tried to bring conservative speakers to campus, and I would get reported to the administration for creating an unsafe environment. I tried to start a gun club at one point to teach people gun safety, and I was reported to my RA for making the other students uncomfortable. And so there's been this sort of thread that runs through a lot of people on campus that have this idea that speech is violence and that they have the right to defend themselves from speech that they don't like, that speech actually makes them unsafe. And it's created this culture in many places where it's deemed acceptable to prohibit other people's free speech rights for the sake of protecting your own personal safety or mental health. And it's a very dangerous trend when, again, we want to create these environments where people are able to have an open dialogue and really allow all ideas to be heard so that they can be countered and debated effectively. And hopefully, eventually, we arrive at something resembling the truth.
Yeah, I don't say, don't interrupt speeches on academic campuses from this perspective of let all of the professors hang out and talk about their ideas. Let the elites stay comfortable. It's not that. It's more so from the perspective of, if Ann Coulter pisses you off, I probably agree with you politically. I probably want a similar future for the country as you, similar policies. But is interrupting Ann Coulter the way to get it? Because now we have a ton of headlines with her name all over them. And a bunch of people who care about free speech are going to now look into her and care about her and maybe sympathize with her a little bit more than they would otherwise. So what's the praxis here? Is this really how our time is best spent on college campuses? Because young people very clearly don't love Ann Coulter. So let her fade into oblivion. You might be making her more relevant by interrupting people like Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, Ann Coulter, who are just not popular among a Gen Z audience. As Mark Blythe, a professor I had at Brown, used to say, if you don't like the people in power, just wait for them to die. And I get that a lot of people in power that people would like to retire are taking a very long time to do so. It feels like we don't have time for that. But we do have time to wait for these public figures to fade into oblivion, which I think will happen a lot faster than maybe Mitch McConnell retiring from Congress.
I definitely don't think Milo Yiannopoulos would have blown up the way that he did if he weren't faced with these massive protests every time he showed up on a campus, because he really gave a rallying cry to conservatives about the illiberal culture on campus that was shouting down speakers. So I think you're right. The better move in most cases is probably to ignore. We're going to be back. More Rising after this.